Welcome back to Mind Clarity. I'm so glad you're here with me today for what I believe is going to be one of the most meaningful conversations we've shared. Before we dive in, if these words speak to something in you, consider becoming part of our Mind Clarity membership family. It helps keep this space alive and growing, and it connects you with a community walking this same path towards stillness and truth. Now, let's begin this journey together. Right now, in this exact moment, something greater than you is already at work, completing you, the way it completed you 9 months before you ever took a breath. You've spent your whole life believing you have to force things, push things, control things. But what if the very thing you're chasing is only found the moment you stop grasping for it? What if everything under heaven, every leaf, every cloud, every ache, and every joy you've ever felt is already exactly as perfect as it needs to be? Today, I want to take you somewhere inside yourself you've forgotten how to visit, a place where nothing is missing and nothing needs to be fixed. Let your life unfold the way it's meant to. Recognize that your own existence is part of something flawless. I've just wrapped up 67 reflections on the Tao, 67 pieces I've written exploring one simple idea. When your perspective shifts, so does everything you're looking at. That's not just a neat turn of phrase. It's something closer to a law of physics. My friend Deepak Chopra likes to remind me that quantum mechanics isn't just weirder than we imagine, it's weirder than we're even capable of imagining. So think about where you actually come from. That source Lao Tzu called the Tao, this vast underlying presence that touches everything. There isn't a single corner of existence it doesn't reach, and yet it accomplishes everything without straining, without forcing, without leaving a single thing incomplete. Step outside sometime, maybe later today, take a walk, and when you get home, really notice how complete everything already is. Watch the clouds, watch the sky, the ocean, the trees, the leaves, and pay even closer attention to the gaps between the leaves, that quiet, invisible order holding it all together. There's a steadiness running through everything, a rhythm that never breaks. What I want to do with the time we have together is point you toward a place inside yourself, a place where you can reflect that same effortless perfection, a place that doesn't rely on force, doesn't push, doesn't strain. Let me share a passage from the Tao with you, along with a few thoughts I had while writing about it. I don't usually read out loud to a group, mostly because I don't enjoy being read to myself, but this one's worth it. This comes from verse 29. Do you imagine you could seize the universe and make it better? I don't think it's possible. Everything under heaven is sacred, untouchable by force. Try to control it and you'll wreck it. Try to hold on to it and it slips away. Let your life unfold naturally. Understand that it too is part of something perfect. Just like breathing in and breathing out, there's a season for leading and a season for following, a season for moving and a season for stillness, a season for strength and a season for depletion, a season for security and a season for risk. For someone who's found wisdom, life itself is a steady drift toward wholeness, so why would they chase after excess, indulgence, or extremes? Everything has its moment. Imagine actually living with that awareness, realizing that whatever you're feeling right now is simply part of this larger rhythm, there's a time for everything. And realizing too that you're not really the one doing it. Lao Tzu keeps circling back to this point. You're not the one taking action, you're being acted upon. Right now, in this instant, something is happening through you. You're one thread among the 10,000 things, and all of it is unfolding exactly as it should. Take my yoga practice, for example. I do it most mornings, 5 or 6 days a week, 90 minutes of hot yoga, Bikram style. And that one small habit has taught me more about this idea than almost anything else. I keep coming back to that 29th verse whenever I'm mid-practice. Those moments where you're holding a pose, foot extended just so, the other turned inward, sinking low, arm reaching out just right, and you have to hold it for 60 full seconds. in a room heated to 110 degrees, after you've already worked through dozens of other postures. There used to be a version of me who'd get to that point completely spent, counting down the seconds, just praying for the moment I could finally collapse onto the mat. But something about sitting with that verse has genuinely reshaped how I experience it. Now, even in that same stretched, straining position, arm up, arm down, muscles burning, ear pressed against my shoulder, I remind myself, there's a time for exhaustion, and there's a time for rest. There's also a time when things simply don't go the way you hoped. Think about what it would mean to actually believe that. When I watch my daughter struggling with something, I try to step back and remember, this is her season for this particular struggle, and there will come a different season where she won't have to face it anymore. If you look at Katie's story, you'll see there was a period of real heavy depression she moved through. There was a season for fear in there too, a season for anger, for worry, for despair, real deep despair. And when you're caught in the middle of those states, if you can just step back for a moment and observe yourself, you can say, there's also a season for the opposite of this. As long as I'm here, living in this physical body, every one of these experiences has its place. And once you accept that, you arrive somewhere new, because you start to remember something. Verse 40 of the Tao points to this directly. Everything comes down to returning. Returning again and again. Returning to what exactly? To the place you originally came from? Think about the first 9 months of your existence, floating inside your mother, surrounded by water. For that entire stretch of time, nothing could interfere with you. Nobody could reach in and make you anxious about anything. You didn't have ultrasound images to stare at, panicking that your nose hadn't formed yet, wondering if something was wrong, spiraling into worry about whether it would ever show up. None of that happened. And somehow, everything unfolded exactly as it needed to, completely independent of any opinion you might have had about it. You weren't doing anything. Nothing was left incomplete. You were being shaped, being completed, and you were entirely at peace with the process. You surrendered to it. There was no fight in it, no resistance. Then you arrived. And in that moment, you might have said, "Thank you, God. Thank you, Tao. Thank you, Source. I'll take it from here." And that's where things went sideways. Suddenly, you took the reins. You pushed God out of the picture, ego, edging God out, and adopted an ego in its place. And what actually is an ego? Just a concept, a story about who you think you are, instead of recognizing yourself as an extension of the divine, a fragment of the source. You, along with everyone around you, decided you were something separate from that. And if you dug into quantum physics, traced the tiniest particle that sparked your existence back to its most fundamental subatomic level, you'd eventually land on the same truth Lao Tzu already understood. Life comes from spirit, not from matter. You didn't originate from a particle. Particles don't generate other particles. They don't spring from other particles. Every particle traces back to a field of energy with no beginning, no end, no edges at all. That field is your true origin. And going back to that, releasing the notion that your identity is built from your possessions or from the people and situations you can control. I don't think there's a bigger, more consistent thread running through the Tao Te Ching than the principle of non-interference. It's fundamentally about releasing your grip, about allowing things to be, about detaching, about letting go of this notion that you're responsible for managing other people's lives. I have 8 children. I'm apparently known as the father of motivation, so I suppose that fits. And as a father of 8, one thing I've come to understand, something that's genuinely made me a better parent, especially in recent years, is learning to hold back. I think of it as the bite your tongue verse of the Tao. Just pause, right at the moment you're about to jump in and tell someone how they should think, feel, or act. Step back instead, and remember what Khalil Gibran, the celebrated Lebanese poet, wrote in The Prophet, a simple, profound truth. Your children aren't really yours. They're life's own longing reaching for itself, expressing through you, but not belonging to you. Stepping back from that urge to control is incredibly liberating. I can't overstate how freeing it is to realize you don't actually have anything you need to do, no one you need to manage. You can simply rest in that peace. I've noticed myself becoming more of an observer lately, even in situations like flying. I was in London just 5 days ago, and if you've traveled through Heathrow recently, you know things have shifted dramatically. We couldn't even bring basic items onto the plane anymore. Whoever these terrorists are, they're peddling fear, and our response is always more fear. That's the pattern. Force generates counterforce, which generates more counterforce, and it spirals. One of the deepest lessons in the Tao is this: any nation that pours its resources and energy into building weapons has drifted away from the Tao. Nations truly aligned with it channel their energy into tractors, homes, and growing food, not arms. I recently watched a film with Nicolas Cage about arms dealers, Lord of War, I believe, and it was a sobering look at just how much of our collective energy goes toward creating the means of our own destruction. We've built up enough weaponry on this planet through our own collective consciousness to wipe out life almost instantly. It's sitting there. We've drifted so far from the core teachings of the great spiritual traditions, all while insisting we're a spiritual or religious nation, even as we've moved away from those very principles. Then we get indignant when other countries want the same weapons we already have, without ever really examining ourselves and all the ways we've turned away from the deepest wisdom the great spiritual teachers offered us. There's something worth sitting with here about how much of our suffering comes from the belief that we're separate from each other, separate from nature, separate from whatever you want to call that underlying field of energy the mystics have pointed to for thousands of years. The moment you buy into that separation, you start believing you need to defend yourself, accumulate things, control outcomes, manage other people. And none of that brings peace. It just brings more grasping. Lao Tzu's whole approach was almost the opposite of how most of us are taught to live. We're raised to believe that effort equals worth. That if you're not pushing, striving, forcing your way toward a goal, you're falling behind. But the Tao keeps circling back to this idea of Wu Wei, which gets translated as non-action, but really means something closer to effortless action. Action that flows with the nature of things instead of fighting against it. Water is the example Lao Tzu returns to again and again. Water doesn't struggle to get around a rock. It doesn't announce its intentions or demand the rock move. It simply yields, flows around it, and over enough time, it wears the rock down completely. That's the power of softness over rigidity, of allowing over forcing. You can see this same principle show up in how people handle relationships, careers, even their own emotional lives. Someone who's constantly trying to force a relationship to look a certain way or force a career into a shape they've decided it needs to take usually ends up exhausted and frustrated. But someone who can hold their intentions loosely, who can work hard and care deeply while still trusting that things unfold on their own timeline, tends to find that life actually cooperates with them more, not less. It's a strange paradox. The letting go isn't passivity. It isn't giving up. It's trusting that the same intelligence that grew you in your mother's womb without any effort on your part is still available to you now, if you'll get out of its way. That idea of ego as something that edges God out is worth sitting with too, because it's not saying ego is evil or something to be ashamed of. It's more that ego is a kind of forgetting. You forget your connection to that larger field, and in the forgetting, you start to believe the small separate story is all there is. You start measuring your worth by comparison, by accumulation, by how much control you can exert over your circumstances and the people around you. And the spiritual path in this framework isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering what was already true before the forgetting happened. This also connects to why so many wisdom traditions emphasize stillness and silence. It's hard to remember your connection to something larger when your mind is constantly narrating, judging, comparing, planning. The noise itself becomes the veil. Practices like meditation, yoga, quiet walks in nature, they're not really about achieving some special state. They're about quieting the noise long enough to notice what was underneath it the whole time. And there's a practical, almost everyday version of this too. The willingness to not interfere. Not just with your children, but with friends, coworkers, even strangers. So much of our stress comes from believing we need to fix, correct, or manage things that were never actually ours to manage. Letting people have their own experience, their own struggles, their own timing, even when it's uncomfortable to watch, is one of the hardest and most freeing practices there is. It doesn't mean indifference. It means trusting that other people are also unfolding according to their own nature, their own season, just like you are. There's also something worth exploring in how this idea of returning applies to aging and to how we relate to our own mortality. Most of us spend the first half of life building a career, a family, an identity, a reputation. We accumulate. We define ourselves by what we've acquired and accomplished. But there's a shift that tends to happen, sometimes gradually and sometimes triggered by a crisis, where the whole orientation flips. Instead of building outward, you start moving inward. You start shedding rather than accumulating. And the Tao would say that's not decline. That's actually the truer direction, the return to source that was always waiting on the other side of all that striving. Carl Jung talked about something similar when he described the second half of life as a movement toward individuation, toward becoming whole rather than simply becoming successful. It's not a coincidence that so many contemplative traditions converge on this same insight from completely different cultural starting points. Whether it's Taoism, certain strands of Buddhism, Christian mysticism, or Sufi poetry, there's a recurring theme that the ego's project of self-construction eventually has to be surrendered if a person wants to touch something deeper and more lasting. There's also a very grounded, almost practical dimension to all this when it comes to how we handle setbacks. If you genuinely believe, even a little, that there's a season for everything, a season for things falling apart as much as a season for things coming together, it changes how you respond to hardship. You stop treating difficulty as evidence that something has gone wrong with your life. Instead, you start to see it as part of a larger rhythm. The way winter isn't evidence that nature has failed. It's simply one phase in a cycle that includes spring. That doesn't mean you stop caring or stop trying to improve your circumstances. It means you stop adding a layer of panic and self-blame on top of ordinary human difficulty. This ties back into the point about weapons and collective fear, too. On a societal level, you can see the same pattern playing out that happens inside an individual mind. Fear convinces us we need more control, more force, more defense, and every one of those responses tends to generate the very threat it was trying to prevent. A person who feels internally insecure often becomes controlling in their relationships, which usually pushes people away and creates the very disconnection they were afraid of. A nation that feels threatened pours resources into weapons, which provokes other nations to do the same, and the original fear becomes self-fulfilling. The Tao's insight is that force multiplies force. Real security on both a personal and collective level doesn't come from overpowering the world around you. It comes from aligning with it. None of this is meant as an argument for doing nothing in the face of real problems. It's more of an invitation to examine the spirit in which you act. There's a difference between acting from fear and grasping versus acting from clarity and alignment. The same outward behavior, raising children, building a career, engaging with the world's problems, can come from two completely different inner places, and the results tend to look very different over time, even if they're not obvious in any single moment. So here's where all of this leaves us. The same intelligence that knit you together in silence and water, that needed no instructions and no interference to make you whole, is still moving through your life today, through every season of strength and every season of exhaustion, through the fear and through what comes after the fear. You were never meant to force your way through existence. You were meant to return to it, again and again. the way you returned from the womb into the world still trusting, still surrendered, still at peace. The moment you stop trying to seize control of what was never yours to control, your children, your circumstances, even your own unfolding, is the moment you finally step back into that vessel of perfection you started as. Let go of the grip. Let go of the ego that edged God out. There's nothing you need to do, and nothing is being left undone. You are, right now, in this very breath, being completed exactly as you were always meant to be.